Weird mysteries. Let us discuss. Hello, by the way. If you are new here, my name is Marcello. I talk about books, mostly, and today I would like to talk about my picks for the weirdest mystery books of all time. And before getting to the list, let's talk about exactly what I mean by weird in this context. So, I am not talking about books that cover strange subject matter, although I do love a wonky plotted mystery. Rather, in this case, I'm referring to books that have strange narrative structures or employ a unique type of storytelling. This list, of course, is subjective and is just reflective of books that I've read in my life so far. So if you have any recommendations, please leave them below. I will probably read them. I am slowly making my way through all of the books that you find people recommend me. There is no particular order to this list. They are not ranked by how strange they are. They aren't ranked by how good they are. They're all very strange and they're all good. I will not spoil any of these books beyond what you would find on their Goodreads blurb, but I will provide my impressions of the books and describe what makes them narratively unique. With that out of the way, let's get weird. The first book that I would like to mention is Janice Hallett's The Twyford Code. I am a huge fan of Janice Hallett. She is basically an auto-buy for me at this point. The Twyford Code is not my favorite book of hers. I think that honor probably goes to The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels, which I will talk about in a future video, and which, if you're a lover of the genre, you should pick up immediately if you haven't already read it. It is one of the most tightly plotted books that I've read in recent memory. Anyway, The Twyford Code follows protagonist Stephen Smith. 40 years ago, in his childhood, Stephen approached his remedial English teacher, Miss Isles, with a copy of a book by renowned children's author Edith Twyford. This book had weird notes all over the margins, and Miss Isles became convinced that there was some sort of code running through Edith Twyford's body of work that would reveal some grand historic mystery. And then Miss Isles disappeared on a field trip. Janice Hallett's books are all epistolary novels in some form, but what makes this one especially unique is that the whole thing is told in the form of voice notes. We're actually just reading the transcripts to these voice notes. That's not the only thing that makes it weird, but for the sake of avoiding spoilers, I will simply say that this book will pull the rug out from under you multiple times as you read it. It will keep you guessing until the very end. The protagonist, Steve, is portrayed as a kind of regular blue-collar dude, and the impression that this gave me as I read it was kind of like if one of my uncles were reading and commenting on the Da Vinci Code to me. I'm not sure if that's too specific of a read, but that was how I felt reading it. I have read reviews that said that this book was kind of difficult to get through, and I will concede that it is probably the least accessible of Hallett's works, but personally I thought that it was the most rewarding, and I found it to be incredibly engaging. The book also has some emotionally heavy moments, especially for me as both a father and someone who lost his father at a relatively young age. There's a lot of sort of paternal themes in there. Anyway, highly recommend. Go read this book. Read all of Janice Hallett's books. They all kick ass. Next up, we have got Strange Pictures by Uketsu. I just read this one last week, and it was what inspired me to make this video. I didn't know anything about this guy, Uketsu, prior to picking this book up, but as it turns out, he is an anonymous Japanese YouTuber who is pretty big and creates mystery content. I will link his channel below for those of you who are interested. Not that he needs my support. He seems to have achieved quite a bit of success on his own. All of his content is in Japanese, at least from what I skimmed through, but there's definitely some weird atmospheric stuff on there too. Maybe you'll like it, who knows, worth checking out. Anyway, back to the book. Strange Pictures presents the reader with a series of ostensibly disconnected mystery short stories, each from the point of view of a different character and centered around a drawing made by a character in that short story. The drawings are all different styles. Some of the stories have multiple drawings, but the drawings are always critical to solving the mysteries contained in their respective stories. This is not a spoiler, that's kind of the premise of the book. While each short story is a self-contained and very rewarding little mystery, as you read you will find that perhaps they are all more related than you think, making for a very rewarding final few chapters. The subgenre here seems to be mystery horror, and there is definitely a certain atmosphere to these stories. They also contain some pretty heavy themes, which I will not reveal for the sake of spoilers, but suffice it to say that this book is not for the faint-hearted. The stories are sad, but they're also pretty emotionally rewarding in a way that a lot of mystery novels are not, especially Japanese mystery books, which tend to focus really heavily on the logic and puzzle aspect of the genre. Having said that, this book does not fall short in the puzzle aspect, and while I was barely able to figure anything out before the protagonist did, I did thoroughly enjoy the protagonists walking me through their reasoning. The Japanese storytelling approach, with lots of direct exposition, often through dialogue, works really well here. I read this book in 2 days, which for me in my current two babies situation is almost unheard of and really speaks to how entertaining this book was. A great story told in a fun and unique way. While we're talking about this one, there is another book that's kind of similar that I'm going to just kind of throw in this list at the last minute. I personally didn't enjoy this one as much, but it was still good and it still fits the bill here. The Eighth Detective by Alex Pavesi. This is another collection of short stories, but these are written by a fictional author, and there is a greater plot that a meta-protagonist tries to decipher about the author's life using these short mysteries. I liked this book enough. I found it entertaining. I really enjoyed the short stories, but I found the overarching mystery to be very underdeveloped, which kind of soured my impression of the whole book. Maybe that will not be your impression, though, so I encourage you to pick this up if it sounds interesting. Like I said, it was certainly readable. Anyway, next, let's talk about S, or Ship of Theseus, by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst. Yes, that J.J. Abrams. This one was apparently all over Book Talk a few years ago. I'm not on TikTok in any capacity, so I wouldn't know, but that is just to say that some of you may have heard of it. This is kind of a story within a story, and I will explain what I mean by that right now. There is a central book called Ship of Theseus by fictional author V.M. Straka. The book that you receive when you buy this is a hardcover version of that book. However, there are notes all over the margins from two separate characters who have read the book and who communicate with each other by leaving notes for each other in the book and like handing it off to one another. The main sort of novel that the book is based around, Ship of Theseus, is not really a mystery. It's kind of a weird atmospheric fantasy with social and psychological commentary woven into it, but the actual mystery here is who its author, V.M. Straka, really is. It is this mystery that our two meta-protagonists are attempting to solve, chronicling their findings both through the margin notes and through various documents and letters that are stuffed within the pages. I have a copy of this. Hold on, I will get it to show you guys. Okay, here it is. So it's really nicely bound as well. And for the like $30 I paid for it, I thought it was a pretty cool little production. I'm gonna put the microphone down just to show you what I'm talking about here. Anyway, you get the idea. The book's kind of just like stuffed with random little inserts, and it was a lot of fun to read. I thought that this book was awesome. The sort of like core novel, The Ship of Theseus, that the book was built around, I guess, was actually a really fun read. I listened to an audiobook version of it and I loved it. The narrator was excellent. It's about this guy who wakes up with his memory lost and stumbles through this kind of strange Victorian seeming world, searching for his identity and getting wrapped up in a grand socio-political movement in the process. I worried that I might find the like core book boring, but I did not, and I found myself actually a little bit sad when it ended. The meta story of the two protagonists in the margins was equally entertaining, though be forewarned, this book requires a little bit of hard work to actually figure out like how to read it. There are multiple sets of notes in different colors in the margins, and figuring out what to read first and what documents pertained to what part of the narrative was a little bit difficult at times. I actually wound up Googling it to figure out what like color orders I should be reading the notes in. Having said that, I enjoyed the margin mystery as well, and I found the entire thing to be really well executed. Definitely narratively unique, though much more of a commitment of time and energy than the other books on this list. If you are tired of your traditional narratives and you want something to really shake you out of a slump, though, this may be the book for you. All right, next up, I've talked about this book before, and I will probably talk about it again, but I simply could not mention weird mystery books without talking about The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, or The 7.5, depending on where you are. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and I will recommend it every chance I get, so, apologies. The premise of this book is that a man wakes up in the woods with no memory of who he is or how he got there. He lives through a very confusing day which ends in a murder, and then he wakes up the next morning to find that it is the same day, and he's living it again, but this time he is inhabiting the body of another one of the characters in the book. He has 7 days to solve the mystery of who has killed the titular Evelyn Hardcastle, using 7 different bodies. This book is a metaphysical trip, but what I love the most about it is that in spite of how absolutely bonkers the narrative structure is, and how strange the situation that the protagonist finds himself in is, the actual mystery itself is surprisingly grounded and pretty much sticks to the rules of a fair play mystery, and a clever, well-plotted fair play mystery as well. Easily one of my favorite books, as evidenced by the fact that I will not shut up about it, so I won't go on too long here, because if you're subscribed to this channel, odds are you've already heard me say all of this. The last thing I'll say about it is that Turtton's prose is excellent, the mystery is excellent, the premise, while ambitious, is phenomenally executed, and I love this book more than I can say. As an honorable mention, since we're talking about him, Stuart Turton's most recent book, The Last Murder at the End of the World, while not quite as weird, is also pretty narratively unique. It's about an idyllic? It's about an idyllic island in a sea of fog with 122 sort of plebeian villagers and 3 scientists. One of the scientists is found stabbed to death, triggering an event that will cause the end of the island's existence in 107 hours. What makes this book unique is that while it is mostly in third person, it is technically in first person, as there is a first person narrator who speaks directly to the reader periodically, but who also has access to all of the thoughts of the inhabitants of the island. And it doesn't speak to the reader in a, like, dear reader, like authory kind of way. It's a character. I won't reveal who or what the narrator is, but I do highly encourage you to check this book out, especially if you like Turton's other works, especially if you like weird mysteries. Next, let's talk about 3 Bags Full by Leonie Swann. This book is not as mind-bending or as heavy as some of the other books on this list, but it is a fun mystery book with a delightful narrative twist. This is a straightforward murder mystery involving the death of a shepherd, but what makes it unique is that it is told from the point of view of his sheep, who band together to investigate and solve the mystery. The sheep have largely only concerned themselves with grazing and other sheep things up until this point, so the death of their shepherd and subsequent events awaken them to a world much larger than their meadow. The book is made more enjoyable by the fact that though they are sheep, their characters are all really well fleshed out, and in spite of how naive and sheepish they all have their own little arcs where they struggle with many of the things that we humans deal with: guilt, relationships, regular character things. This one was a little bit difficult to get into at first because there is just so much that the sheep are not aware of, and it takes some time to really get into the investigation, but the prose is clever and enjoyable enough that this doesn't really matter too much in the long run. I recommend this book if you want a relatively light but still emotionally poignant mystery with a narrative twist and some solid characters. It will not let you down. Also, this book was originally in German, but the translation is very good, and I haven't read enough German books to know how this may have impacted the storytelling style, but I figured it was worth mentioning anyway. I think there are a few sequels to this too. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm a bad YouTuber. All right, so a few honorable mentions before we get to the final entry here. We have Cairn's Jawbone by Edward Powys Mathers, a book whose manuscript apparently got thrown up in the air and then all the pages sort of fell all over the place and they shoved them back together again and challenged the readers to assemble the book in the correct order in order to solve the mystery. I have not done so. It's sitting over here somewhere, all disassembled. I have no idea if I will ever be able to do so, so I'm not including it fully in the list because I can't really speak to it that well. I also am not sure that it would count here because it is my understanding that the pages getting mixed up was actually not intentional. Second honorable mention, The Raw Shark Texts by Stephen Hall, a book about a man whose memories are being eaten by some kind of metaphysical shark, which is kind of more of a mystery box mixed with a psychological fiction novel, but which was definitely weird and mysterious and quite enjoyable. The Hexologists by Josiah Bancroft, a fantasy mystery by the author of one of my favorite fantasy series, The Books of Babel. This one's weird just because Bancroft's language is very unique, and the world that he's created is also weird and not really what you would expect for a mystery novel. Eversion by Alastair Reynolds, a gothic sci-fi novel about a man who relives a fatal scientific expedition over and over again through different time periods. Also more of a mystery box than a straightforward mystery novel, so it doesn't make the list, but narratively riveting, and I highly recommend you check it out. Also really well written. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's get to the final entry on this list, which again is not really the best or the weirdest book here, but happens to be the one that I read most recently, and I'm pretty excited about it for that reason. So that's probably why I chose to include it on here as well. The book in question is The City and the City by China Miéville. So this book is a murder mystery, strictly speaking. It's kind of a police procedural, but a lot of the focus of the novel is put on the weird world that Miéville has created, as well as its politics. I won't say that the murder takes a backseat to this, as it's kind of core to everything that happens in the book, but the book certainly has a lot to say, and it takes the time to say it. The premise here is that there are 2 cities that are basically superimposed on one another, existing in the same geographical spot, but still entirely politically and culturally separate. Citizens of one city are supposed to simply ignore or unsee the storefronts and citizens of the other city. If you're driving in traffic, you're like somehow supposed to ignore the other drivers from the other city, even while avoiding getting into accidents with them. Citizens are not allowed to cross the borders unless they go through a specific nexus point with the appropriate visa or whatever, which is located in the center of the city. These 2 worlds exist in the same place at the same time and refuse to acknowledge each other, lest they be taken away by some secret police that are responsible for upholding the separation. So the book follows a detective from one of the cities who finds a dead body that may or may not have been murdered by someone in the other city, necessitating that investigators on either side of the border join forces to solve the mystery. The book kind of drip feeds you exposition, so I felt like there was a lot thrown at me when I first started reading it. Fortunately, the the quality of the prose is excellent and extremely readable, and while I initially was worried that I would be kind of confused and have to sort of power through the first third of this book to get to the interesting parts, the book quickly turned into a page-turner that I had a difficult time putting down. Be forewarned though, while this book does make use of the narrative of a noir detective story, it is much more than that. It's kind of as much of a weird speculative fiction adventure as it is a mystery, with a lot of time spent exploring the strange world that Miéville has created, as is spent doing the standard sort of tracking down of suspects and clues and doing detective things. I think this book was really well done, and is much better for this inclusion. It wouldn't have been as interesting or as readable if I weren't so fascinated by this crazy world that I was reading about, but I did think that this was worth noting. Having said that, I highly recommend giving this a shot. It is probably the best book that I've read this year. Really excellent world building and storytelling, solid characters, and a truly unique premise. Well done, Mr. Miéville. Do not watch the BBC miniseries adaptation though, because it is a trope-addled mess that obviously did not understand what made the source material excellent. I'm sorry, I will get off my pretentious, I read the books first high horse now. Anyway, that is our list for today. New Animorphs video will be out soon. I'm sorry it takes so long to do anything at all. My children are eating up my time and my psyche, and I am crumbling to pieces. So, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys more than I could convey right now.